The rain over Manhattan wasn't supposed to last, but it always did. It was the kind of rain that blurred glass towers into silver ghosts and turned city lights into bleeding streaks across the pavement. Daniel Cross, billionaire and founder of one of the most powerful real estate empires in New York, didn't usually walk anywhere. His life moved in chauffeurs, boardrooms, and penthouses high enough to ignore the weather. But that night, for reasons even he couldn't name, he asked his driver to stop 2 blocks early. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the sound of a piano that used to play in a home that wasn't his anymore. He stepped out, umbrella snapping open, and began walking the empty street toward his apartment. He had just closed a billion-dollar deal in London. The world saw him as untouchable, ruthless even. But as the rain hit his coat, all he felt was silence. That's when he saw her. A small figure sat by a lamppost near the park gates. A little girl, no more than 7, soaked to the bone, hugging a stuffed rabbit whose one ear hung by a thread. Her lips trembled, and her shoes were muddy, too big for her feet. At first, he thought her parents must be nearby. But no one was. The street was empty except for her and the rain. He slowed down, something in him tightening. "Hey," he said gently. "Are you okay?" The girl looked up, startled. Her cheeks were streaked with water, rain or tears he couldn't tell. I lost my bus," she said softly. "And my mom's not home yet." "Where do you live?" She pointed across the park. "Just over there, I think." Daniel hesitated. He wasn't good with children. His life didn't leave room for them, not since the night everything fell apart years ago. But something about the girl's voice cracked the wall he'd built around himself. He took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Let's find your home," he said quietly. As they began walking together under his umbrella, she glanced up at him. "You sound like someone I used to know." Daniel froze for a second, the words slicing deeper than she could possibly understand. "Yeah," he managed. "Who?" "My dad," she whispered. "He used to walk with me like this, before he got lost too." He didn't ask more. He just held the umbrella lower, letting her stay close. Neither of them knew that by the time the rain stopped, their lives would never be the same again. By the time they crossed the park, the rain had thinned to a cold drizzle. The girl's tiny footsteps splashed in the shallow puddles, her small hand clutching the edge of Daniel's sleeve like she was afraid he'd vanish. Streetlights flickered through the mist as they approached a row of old brownstones, the kind that hadn't seen renovation in decades. They stopped in front of one that leaned slightly to the right, its porch light flickering like it hadn't decided whether to stay alive or not. "This is it," she said softly, pointing. "That's our place." Daniel studied the building. The paint peeled from the door, the windows fogged from the inside. It didn't look abandoned, just tired, worn down by time and struggle. He crouched to her level. "Do you live here alone?" She shook her head. "With my mom, but she works late." Her voice trembled as she looked up at him, eyes wide with an unspoken question. "Will you leave me now?" He hesitated. "You shouldn't be out here this late," he said gently. "Does your mom know where you are?" The girl looked away. She said never to bother her when she's working. Daniel's chest tightened. There was something in those words that felt too familiar, an echo of a past he'd buried years ago. He glanced at the flickering light again. "What's your name?" "Lena," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "That's a beautiful name, Lena. I'm Daniel." Her small hand slipped from his sleeve as she turned toward the door. "You can go now," she said, trying to sound brave. "Thank you for helping me." But Daniel didn't move. He watched as she reached into her pocket, pulling out a rusted key attached to a pink keychain shaped like a heart. She tried to fit it into the lock, but her hands were shaking. After a few tries, she stopped and pressed her forehead against the door. "It's stuck again," she muttered. Daniel stepped forward quietly. Let me try. He took the key gently from her hand, twisted it once, and the door clicked open. See? Fixed, he said softly. Lena smiled for the first time, small, tired, but real. You're good at doors. He chuckled faintly. I've had to open a few in my life. Inside, the apartment was dimly lit by a single lamp. There were children's drawings on the fridge, a half-empty bowl of cereal on the counter, and the faint smell of lavender mixed with rain. It wasn't luxury, but it was home. Lena slipped off her shoes and placed them neatly by the door. Mom says the floor's cold, she said, then looked up at him. You can wait if you want. She'll be here soon. Daniel started to protest, to say he should go, but something held him in place. The quiet, the drawings, the sound of a child trying to make a messy life feel normal. He nodded slowly. All right, I'll wait. She disappeared into the small living room and came back holding a photo frame. The glass cracked down the middle. This is my mom, she said, handing it to him. Daniel froze. The woman in the photo, smiling, hair pulled back, a little girl in her arms, was someone he hadn't seen in almost 20 years. Someone he'd once promised never to hurt. Her name was Claire, and she had been the only woman he ever loved. He set the frame down slowly, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. Lena, he said carefully, his voice trembling. What's your mom's full name? Claire Summers, she replied without hesitation. Do you know her? Daniel swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. Yeah, he whispered. I used to. And in that moment, the billionaire who thought he had everything realized he had just walked straight into the one chapter of his life he'd never closed. For the first time in years, Daniel Cross felt the ground tilt beneath him. He stood there in the doorway of that small, dim apartment, the sound of rain dripping from the roof and the distant hum of city life fading behind him. The photograph of Claire Summers still rested on the counter, her warm smile trapped behind a web of cracked glass. He hadn't said her name out loud in almost 2 decades, yet here he was, staring at her face again, through the eyes of a child who looked hauntingly like her. Lena tilted her head, curious. You okay, Mr. Daniel? He blinked, forcing a small smile. Yeah, I just thought your mom looked familiar. She beamed, proudly holding the picture close to her chest. Everyone says she's really pretty. She is, Daniel said softly. His voice carried the weight of something heavier than nostalgia. Regret. He turned toward the window. The city lights bled through the curtains, cutting faint golden lines across the floor. He remembered those same lights years ago, when he and Claire were just dreamers in their 20s, building their startup from nothing. Back then, she'd been his balance, the calm to his ambition. But when success came, it didn't just change their world. It tore it apart. Money, pride, distance. That's what ruined them. He'd chosen the company over her, convinced that love could wait until he'd built something worth offering. But when he returned, she was gone. Her number disconnected, her apartment empty. He'd searched for months before finally giving up, burying her memory under years of business deals and boardroom walls. And now, somehow, fate had brought her back to him through this small, rain-soaked girl. A sudden knock on the door broke his thoughts. Lena gasped. Mom! Daniel's heart pounded as he turned toward the entrance. The door opened slowly, and there she was, Claire Summers. Her hair was a little darker now, her face thinner, lines of quiet struggle etched near her eyes. But that same light, that same strength was still there. For a second, she didn't seem to recognize him. Then her gaze flicked up, and the world seemed to stop. Daniel? She whispered, her voice trembling. He managed a faint, nervous laugh. Hi, Claire. The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. Lena looked between them, confusion blooming across her face. You two know each other? Claire's eyes softened. We used to, she said quietly. Daniel stepped forward, hands raised slightly as if approaching something fragile. I was walking home. I found Lena by the park. She said she was lost. I didn't know she was yours until I saw the photo. Claire's jaw clenched. You found her by the park? Her voice cracked. God, I told her never to. She stopped herself, sinking into a chair, running a hand through her wet hair. Thank you for bringing her back. Of course, he said, his tone low, gentle. You don't have to thank me. Claire looked up again, her expression softening for the briefest moment. It's been a long time, Daniel. He nodded. Too long. Lena watched them curiously, sensing something deeper than the words being said. Were you friends? She asked. Daniel hesitated. Claire answered first. Something like that. He smiled faintly. Your mom and I built things together once. Claire's eyes flickered, part amusement, part sadness. And then you tore them down. The words hit like a quiet blade, and Daniel didn't argue. He deserved them. As Lena disappeared into her room to change, the two sat in heavy silence. The years between them hung thick in the air, filled with the echoes of everything left unsaid. I didn't know you were still in New York, he said finally. I didn't think it mattered, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. That life, the one we had, it ended a long time ago. Daniel nodded slowly. Maybe, but some things don't stay buried, Claire. Especially when they find their way back to your doorstep. For a moment, their eyes met. Not as strangers, not as former lovers, but as two people standing in the wreckage of choices they'd both made. And neither could deny it. Something unfinished had just reopened. The air in that small apartment felt too heavy for words. The storm outside had quieted, but inside, another kind of storm lingered. The one that comes when two people who once shared everything suddenly realize how far apart time has pulled them. Daniel sat on the edge of the old sofa, his coat still damp, his gaze wandering across the room. The walls told stories, faded photographs, a stack of children's books, sketches taped near the kitchen table. Life had moved on here with or without him. Claire set a kettle on the stove, the whistle breaking the silence between them. So, she began carefully, you're still, what do they call it now? One of the richest men in America. Daniel smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. That's what the magazines say. And yet here you are, she said, turning around slowly, in a place most of those people wouldn't set foot in. He looked at her, studying the familiar sharpness in her tone, the same honesty that had once made him fall for her. Money doesn't change the fact that I got lost, Claire, he said softly. And tonight, I guess I found my way back by accident. She poured 2 cups of tea, setting one in front of him without meeting his eyes. You didn't find your way back, she said. You found Lena. Daniel glanced toward the small bedroom where Lena's laughter echoed faintly as she played with her stuffed rabbit. She's a good kid, he said quietly. Smart, kind, reminds me of someone. Claire finally looked at him, her eyes tired but still fierce. She's all I've got. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city filled the space where their words used to live. Then Daniel asked the question he'd been avoiding. Does she know? Claire froze. Know what? He met her eyes, his voice steady. That I'm her father. Her hands trembled slightly as she set her cup down. Daniel, he didn't let her finish. Claire, she looks just like you. But her eyes, he exhaled, shaking his head. They're mine. I didn't realize it until I saw her smile. Claire turned away, gripping the counter. You left, she whispered. You left before I could tell you. Daniel's chest tightened. The words hit like a hammer, quiet but final. I didn't leave you, he said. I left to protect what we built. I thought you didn't want anything to do with me after the deal fell apart. She turned, eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. You stopped calling, Daniel. You disappeared into your success. You think I didn't wait? I waited for months. Then one day I realized. You chose the empire over me. He stood slowly, guilt weighing on his shoulders. And that choice cost me everything. Claire's voice softened, breaking under the truth. You think money can fix 10 years of silence? No, he said. But maybe I can start by not running this time. Lena's door creaked, and her small voice drifted through. Mom? Mr. Daniel? Are you fighting? Claire quickly wiped her eyes. No, sweetheart. Just talking. Lena padded out in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Mom, he said, you're pretty. Claire froze mid-breath. Daniel chuckled softly. She's right. The girl smiled sleepily and climbed onto the couch, curling up beside him as if she'd known him all her life. He froze for a moment, unsure what to do, until she rested her head on his arm. You smell like rain, she murmured. Yeah, he said quietly. It's been a long night. Claire stood there watching them. The sight tugged at something deep inside her, a part of her heart that had stayed locked away since the day Daniel left. He looked up at her, his voice almost a whisper. Let me be part of her life, Claire. I missed everything, her first steps, her first words. Don't take the rest away from me too. She didn't answer. She just looked at him for a long time, torn between anger and the faint, fragile hope she'd sworn she'd never feel again. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. She deserves to know who you are. But if you hurt her, Daniel, if you disappear again, I won't, he said immediately. Not again. I promise. Claire nodded slowly, her defenses lowering just enough to let one truth slip through. Then maybe, she said, we'll start with the truth tomorrow. And for the first time that night, Daniel smiled. Not as a billionaire, not as a businessman, but as a man who had just been given a second chance he thought he'd lost forever. The first light of morning filtered through the thin curtains, painting the worn walls in soft gold. For the first time in years, Daniel Cross woke up not to the sterile hum of a penthouse air conditioner or the faint buzz of his phone on a marble nightstand, but to the quiet sound of a child's laughter coming from the kitchen. It was a sound that didn't belong to his world of board meetings and stock tickers. It was softer, real, alive. He sat up on the small sofa where he'd fallen asleep sometime before dawn, his jacket folded neatly over the armrest. Claire's doing, he guessed. He could smell coffee, faintly burnt toast, and the sweetness of syrup. He smiled. So this is what mornings used to feel like, he thought. Not luxury, not silence, just life. In the kitchen, Lena stood on a stool, her hair a mess of curls, flipping pancakes with more enthusiasm than skill. Claire hovered beside her, guiding her hands carefully. When she saw Daniel at the doorway, her face softened, though her guard still lingered behind her eyes. Good morning, he said quietly. Lena grinned. We made breakfast. Well, I did. Mom just helped a little. Daniel chuckled, stepping closer. It smells amazing. She handed him a small plate with a slightly lopsided pancake shaped like a heart. This one's yours, she said proudly. He blinked, caught off guard by the gesture. Thank you, Lena. He took a bite. It was half raw, half burnt, but he didn't care. It was the best thing he'd tasted in years. Claire poured him a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, her voice cautious. We need to talk. He nodded. I know. Lena, oblivious to the tension, hummed softly as she spread syrup across her plate. Mom says you're really nice, she said between bites, and that you helped me find home. I think that means you're my friend. Daniel smiled gently. I'd like that. Then Claire spoke. Low, steady, and deliberate. She deserves to know the truth, Daniel. About who you are. About everything. He nodded again, more solemnly this time. Then let's tell her together. Lena looked up from her pancakes, curious. Tell me what? Claire knelt beside her, taking her small hands in hers. Her eyes glistened. Sweetheart, Do you remember how you always asked why you don't have a dad like the other kids at school? Lena nodded slowly. Claire took a shaky breath. Well, he's been gone a long time, but he didn't stop caring. He just didn't know how to find his way back. She looked up at Daniel, urging him silently to continue. He crouched beside them, his voice soft but full of emotion. Lena, I didn't know about you until last night, but the moment I saw you, his voice broke. I saw my whole world in your eyes. The girl tilted her head, studying him like she was solving a puzzle. You mean, you're my dad? Daniel swallowed hard, nodding. Yeah, I am. Silence filled the room. Claire watched her daughter's face carefully, ready for tears, anger, confusion, but none came. Lena just blinked, her small brow furrowed in thought. Then slowly she smiled. I told you I knew someone who sounded like you, she said simply. It was you, Daddy. The word Daddy hit him like sunlight through fog, warm, unexpected, and almost too much to bear. His throat tightened as he pulled her into his arms. She clung to him without hesitation, like she'd been waiting for this her whole life. Claire turned away, wiping at her eyes quietly. After a long moment, Lena leaned back and looked at him seriously. Are you gonna leave again? He shook his head. Never. She studied him for another second, then nodded as if sealing a deal. Okay, but you have to come to my school play next week. I'm a tree. He laughed through his tears. A tree? That sounds like the most important role there is. Claire smiled faintly, watching the two of them. She takes her part seriously, she said, her voice gentle now. Daniel looked at her, his eyes softening. Just like her mom. The morning unfolded slowly. Pancakes, stories, laughter that filled the cracks between years of silence. And as sunlight poured through the window, Daniel realized something profound. He had spent his entire life chasing buildings that touched the sky, but what he'd really been searching for was right here. A home built not from glass and steel, but from second chances. Later, as he stood at the doorway preparing to leave for a meeting he could no longer care about, Claire walked him out. You meant what you said? She asked quietly. Every word, he replied. I lost you once, Claire. I'm not losing either of you again. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, she smiled without pain. Then maybe, she said softly, this time we start over, not from where we left off, but from where we are. Daniel reached for her hand, not with the arrogance of the billionaire he once was, but with the humility of a man who had finally found what no amount of money could buy. As he walked away, Lena's voice echoed from inside. Bye, Daddy. Don't be late for my play. He turned, smiling through the tears that threatened again. I wouldn't miss it for the world. And for the first time since the rain began, Daniel Cross stepped into the sunlight, not as a man haunted by his past, but as one finally brave enough to come home to it.